how would you say people can be either more present or open to those moments that give us that kind of, ah, there's something in this? How can we cultivate more openness around that?
Wow, what a great question. Well, I think it comes out of our difficulties or our challenges or our suffering. So there's that there. But there needs to also be a little bit of hope that actually maybe there's another way of doing things. And
Mm.
if there is some sense of openness to, okay, maybe there is a solution to this, but I don't know what it is right now, then I guess we start to open our attention to look for what could be the possible solution. It could be in the form of a poster, it could be like in the form of books for you, it could be a YouTube video that someone listens to. But then it's also, I guess it takes a little bit of courage, but that courage comes from the energy of not wanting to continue to suffer. So you use that energy of, hey, I don't want to be stuck in this place. I want to find something new. Let me be open to trying something different.
Welcome to the Soulful Sound Podcast, where you will find conscious, inspiring content to support your healing and transformation. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation for you to be part of our community, where more insightful conversations await to guide you to heal, grow, and thrive. Simply click the subscribe button. It means the world to me. Your support, your comments, everything is truly incredible, and we're only at the beginning of this awesome journey together. I'm so excited to be on this adventure with you, and your subscription is a valuable part of making it all happen. Thank you so much for joining, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode on the Soulful Sound Podcast. I am joined by the awesome Shamash Alidina, who is a best-selling author of 10 books, including Mindfulness for Dummies and The Mindful Way Through Stress. He is passionate about helping both the general public and professional practitioners to find and share greater peace and purpose through mindfulness, meditation, act, and non-duality. Welcome, Shamash.
Thank you. What a great welcome. I'm feeling excited already.
Oh, me too, me too. Now, I like to kind of top and tail my episodes with what's your story? What got you into the work that you're doing today? Please share anything that you feel called to share about your journey to this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was kind of reflecting on that this morning, because of, when you're doing podcasts and stuff, it's a question that quite often kind of comes up, what's your story?
Mm.
And I wanted to take a mindful approach because and this will be weaved into everything that we'll be talking about today. Um, in that, even when we're doing something like sharing our story, if we do it in a slightly different way each time, it not only is insightful for the people listening to the story, but it's actually insightful for the person sharing the story. So it's a transformation process both ways. So,
Absolutely.
so I enjoyed reflecting on it this morning, and I was thinking back to what I don't normally share is my parents' journey, which obviously shapes my own journey. And they came to the UK in the early 70s from East Africa. At a time when there was a lot of conflict. There was a revolution in Zanzibar. There was lots of challenges happening in Uganda, Tanzania, and I've actually recently just come from South Africa as well, so thinking a lot about Africa at the moment. And then they came with basically nothing to the UK. And then my mum was more kind of steeped in the Hindu tradition, and my dad is Ismaili. His parents were Ismaili, so a little bit more towards the Muslim tradition, but neither of them were that religious. But I guess, going through their challenges, they wanted to draw on something to help them through that process of living in a new country and trying to make an income to survive, and then having little kids, me and my brother. And so they got very interested in self-development, and they used to listen to these tapes all the time. I don't know if anyone's heard of Nightingale Conant. Have you heard of that? Nightingale
Yes,
Conant.
for sure, for
So they
sure.
used to get these audio tapes, and they're just listening to them in the car all the time, and I'm just sitting there thinking, why are they listening to all this stuff about positive thinking and about um self-development and all this stuff, and even negotiation skills and everything, because if they had a little business. And so although I wasn't that interested in it consciously, unconsciously, it was having an effect. And and the fact that they're from these two different religious traditions, they became just naturally interested more in philosophy rather than in specific religions. And again, that had an unconscious effect. Now I was being brought up, interested in things like science and stuff. But my first kind of connection with mindfulness happened when I was at university. I was constantly thinking about the future, constantly planning, setting goals, and thinking about, this is going to happen and this is going to happen. Never, the concept of a present, being in the present moment, no one had ever really shared that at all. Even in the Nightingale Conan audio tapes, if anyone's heard of them, they didn't really talk about meditation and stuff at all. Um, but I had an experience, so I wasn't enjoying my degree that much, and especially when I was studying chemical engineering, and I did it as a job, and it was really boring. You're sitting at the desk all day, and you're just designing the size of these pipes. I'm like, this is not what I want to do, you know. So I'm like, what should I do? And then I saw this poster in the underground for a philosophy class, and it was a Socrates quote, I believe. The unexamined life is not worth living. And it was really cheap for students. And I was a student at the time. So I thought, let me just try something that's the opposite of chemical engineering, which at the time felt like practical philosophy. Sounds the opposite. And I was so glad I did that because I had this amazing experience in this little meditation they did where they got us to connect with all our senses. It's just for 5 minutes. And then they got us listening to our thoughts, which I'd never really done. I just thought I am my thoughts. And then they said, just notice the fact that you're able to observe your thoughts means there's a part of you that's the observer. The fact that you're able to notice your emotions is a part of you that's the observer of your feelings. And then they also helped us kind of connect to this silence beyond the thoughts. And when you do things for the first time, sometimes you really connect with it better than at any other time, because if you're doing something totally fresh, that was the experience. I was doing this meditation and it was just so fresh and there's so much for the first time. And I'd never really done anything like that. That was the life-changing moment for me. I thought, why am I so old? I'm 20 years old and now I'm learning this. I thought that's almost too late, I thought. But I'm like, okay, at least I've learned it now, even though I'm very old. And and I'll have to teach this. And I think children should learn this from a really young age. So that set in motion the idea that I want to become a school teacher and then just share this with children. And that's what I ended up doing. I became a school teacher, and then I taught things like mindfulness. But also, I was a science teacher, so I was teaching physics, chemistry, biology. But also, there was some quiet time in the school, and this school was linked to this philosophy school. So it actually started in 1975, this children's school, and they'd been teaching things like meditation since then. So that's how I got into it. From that point of maybe this vacuum, like maybe in other families they would have a certain religion that they follow, a certain philosophy, but I guess there was a little bit of the vacuum there. There was this philosophical thinking, and so out of that, I discovered and got this interest in philosophy, particularly Eastern philosophy and mindfulness, and that kind of started my journey of sharing. And then we could talk more about that. But then after 10 years of being a school teacher, I ended up writing books and then just doing this full time for the last 15 years.
Amazing. Wow. Well, I mean, I was going to ask you about the pivotal moment. I think you kind of spoke about that already, but what I didn't know, and it's so beautiful, is we actually have quite a lot in common. There's a parallel in our upbringing. I don't know if you know much about it, but we grew up, or I grew up in a setting where parents from different cultures, Trinidad and Barbados, Caribbean, so from the same kind of space, but very different cultures. And while we came from a Christian lineage from both sides, even though there were different strands, my parents also, especially my mother at the time, did not feel as connected to specifically Christianity as it was, and she moved very much into metaphysics. So while you were listening to tapes, I was reading books because she started a bookstore when I was in primary school called Metaphysical Books. So I was
Wow.
reading Louise Hay, Deepak Chopra, and that kind of generation of transformational people in our society as we know them now. And so my backdrop was also that. not
Wow.
necessarily through listening, but through reading. I would come from school and go and read the books and really just immerse myself and ask these questions and try to understand things. It was very hard to understand at the time, but somewhere in the backdrop, things are going in, you know? So I find that really fascinating that you that we had kind of something similar in that moment. And as you were sharing just now, I was curious in my own experience as to what was that pivotal moment for me. Because for you, you spoke about seeing something on the London Underground, right? It was just like
Yeah,
something just struck you. And that struck you because of all the stuff that was already, kind of cultivated in the background. So
exactly.
if we could speak to that a little bit, how would you say people can be either more present or open to those moments that give us that kind of, there's something in this? How can we cultivate more openness around that?
Wow, what a great question. Well, I think it comes out of our difficulties or our challenges or our suffering. So there's that there. But there needs to also be a little bit of hope that actually maybe there's another way of doing things. And
Mhm.
if there is some sense of openness to, okay, maybe there is a solution to this, but I don't know what it is right now, then I guess we start to open our attention to look for what could be the possible solution. It could be in the form of a poster, it could be like in the form of books for you, it could be a YouTube video that someone listens to. But then it's also, I guess it takes a little bit of courage, but that courage comes from the energy of not wanting to continue to suffer. So you use that energy of, hey, I don't want to be stuck in this place. I want to find something new. Let me be open to trying something different. So trying something new. And that is uh, my favorite new definition of mindfulness, actually, to notice new things, to try new things, or to do things in a different way. Rather than just be present, think about it in terms of newness and creativity. So you could be, if you're feeling stuck and you don't know what the solution is to get out of it, just do something slightly different. Like, just take a slightly different route to work. If you walk on one side of the pavement, walk on the other side of the pavement. Take a slightly different route. If you normally take the bus, maybe take the train. Like in my example, I saw that poster because I happened to be on the underground, and I was in that particular station. So sometimes even your physical location could open you up to that. Listening to a podcast like this, there might be a podcast episode that you've got that you offer, and you think, oh no, I don't. That doesn't sound interesting to me. Then challenge yourself to listen to that. Rather than just doing the stuff that interests you, do something that doesn't interest you. Do
Mhm.
think things in terms of the opposite. Because of the world is always changing, everything is always changing all the time. But we create this idea that things are the same and things are fixed,
Mm.
and that this is the issue, and this is what causes a lot or maybe all of our suffering, in that we think everything needs to stay the same, and the reality is everything's changing all the time. And it's the difference between those two. The more we think things must be the same, the more we'll suffer through that. So yeah, it's a wonderful question and wonderful way of reflecting for us all, that question you've asked, and learning to open up and notice new things, try new things. I think can help create that little shift that is needed. And
Mm.
it doesn't need to be a big, like, this epiphany moment may be a big thing, like it may have been for you or me, but it doesn't have to be. It can be the
Yeah.
tiniest thing. It can be the tiniest thing
Yes.
that can make the difference.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And as you were describing and reflecting on that, I wrote three words, which I think later you spoke, which I thought was really beautiful. I love to pull words out, if you like, creating my own formulas to understand and integrate, and also to be very grounded and practical for people listening. And you're so good at explaining very practically. So for me, that formula is courage, curiosity, and creativity. The three
Wow.
C's, if you like.
Wow. I love it.
Which is amazing because it's what you were talking about. Creativity came third for me as well, and I love that. Very simple. Try something new. Try something. Notice something new. Try something new, and try something different. Oh, so simple. Not always
Yeah.
easy, but simple, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's stunning. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And Yeah, and it's not that difficult actually. How much effort does it take to notice something new? Like for the people who are
Mm,
listening to this podcast now, just see if you can. There's one sentence that Simone shares or I share where it's just something slightly different. To notice that doesn't
mm,
take that much effort, but there's actually decades of research to show that when we do these small things, it makes a huge difference.
yeah.
I think I've shared this example with you before, but let's share it again, which is about this experiment they did with an orchestras. So they got an orchestra, and people who play in the orchestra for years and years, they're really bored. They're playing the same music again and again, and they're stuck in it because they're geniuses at it, but they need to play the same music. So they did an experiment with one group. They said carry on as you are, and they recorded that music. The other group they said change something very subtly about the way you play. They can't change it much because it's a piece of classical music, so it has to be
Yeah.
the same music. But
Yes.
change it in a way that you'd notice, but nobody else would. So they're trying new things.
Hmm.
And then when they recorded it, 90% more people preferred that piece of classical music. It's the same piece of classical music. I'm not sure if I'd be able to tell, but they could tell the difference. And then when
Yeah.
they asked the players in that orchestra, they said that they loved it. They preferred it more too. So
Mm.
we need to imagine if we did that in our lives all the time, like whenever we're having conversations, when we're connecting with our loved ones, when we're doing our work, when we're doing our routine activities, the so-called routine is done slightly differently. We start to
Mhm.
feel a bit more alive, and we start to notice new things, and essentially we're becoming more present.
That's beautiful. So there are
Yeah.
two things that I want to pull from that. So for me, I completely relate to that experience. In my touring days, I remember I used to be in the Australian Pink Floyd tribute band many, many years ago. I toured
Oh,
around
wow.
doing like the Dark Side of the Moon album, which was incredibly fun. But when you're doing this, when you're a tribute band, you're doing the same thing again. You're trying to sound like Pink Floyd, right? You're doing the same thing over and over again. Now, that's still to date the hardest vocal of my life. I did Great Gig in the Sky, which is just this improv wailing for 3.5 minutes. And I had to learn someone else's improv, try to get it as close to it as possible, which was near impossible. And then I brought myself to it. But after weeks of doing the same thing, there were moments that I got on stage and it just felt very much like it was automated. And I was recording all the sessions so that I could listen back and learn and notice and so on for myself. But I thought, I need to feel this more when I get up on stage now. I mean, I'm expressing myself, I'm in it, but it's now becoming automatic. So I consciously told myself a story that shifted my perspective enough to bring a bit more adrenaline, bring more something else, something small into it, and all the performances changed. And I do believe that that's in the frequency of expression, of creativity, of authenticity that people feel. No matter how close, as you said, it is to the original, your personal stamp, my love of sound and voice. So
Mm.
while it was my voice, there was just a deeper connection to myself in that expression that I think was really profound. So I kind of really relate to that story.
Yeah.
And what I want to ask you now, the other side of it is the very simple things that can kind of disrupt the patterns and how that then can impact our lives. So an example of wearing your bag on one shoulder all the time, and then you put it on the other shoulder and it feels strange, that kind of right hand and left hand thing.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
do that often to kind of feel the difference or to stay balanced and to kind of bring that coordination in the body. So if I use that as an example, can you maybe dig into it a little bit more to speak to what happens when we then try the new, try the different, notice the new, and then things shift, the pattern is interrupted. Can we speak to that layer?
Yeah, so right from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, there's different opportunities to try new things and experiment with new things. So it could be from the moment that you wake up in the morning, you may just take 2 or 3 breaths.
Mhm.
People normally say take a deep breath. So you could take 3 deep breaths. But I've actually recently done a training with it's a method called the Buteyko method, and what he was arguing is that if you take a deep breath, but you think deep is just a big breath, then
Mm.
that may not actually be helpful because if you end up breathing out more carbon dioxide, and it's actually better to take a slow, a deep as in deep down in your belly, but slow breath in and slow breath out. And that so just breathing a little bit different could be a good way to start the day. Brushing your teeth, you could try using your different hands to do it.
Mhm.
Making it into a little bit of a game and really noticing maybe if you start brushing on one side of the teeth, you could start with the other, you could do the other side. Um, and just it's more of I could keep giving you different examples like that all day, but it's about this kind of attitude or mindset that you bring into your day. So the mindset you're bringing is that, okay, I'm going to look for opportunities to experiment. Thinking of the day as a play. This is something I was doing yesterday, thinking of the day as a playful experiment. So how can I experiment with this day, and what will I do differently, and what new things will I learn? Like at the moment, a lot of people talk about AI at the moment, and whether it's good or bad and stuff. Um, but the history of technological development is that if we ignore it, usually it's not a good idea because it continues to grow and develop, and things go more in that direction, and we just start feeling more and more behind. So
Yeah.
rather than just focusing on the negative aspects of something like artificial intelligence, what about if you start playing with it?
Hmm.
And see if you can use it, just like the internet can be used as a force for good and email can be used as a force for good. Maybe you can use AI as a force for good too. So how can you use it in a way that would be kind of fun and playful, and you could have conversation with it, tell it to act like the Dalai Lama and have a conversation with it and see what advice it gives you. Um, and then ask it, see what other people are doing with it, have conversations with others. So there will always be new opportunities with new things coming out, whether it's technology or just the way you connect with nature, and using these opportunities, and just think of it as a playful experiment. I just love that idea. Having been a science teacher, whenever I told the children today we're going to be doing an experiment, everyone's like, yay. If I said everyone, they get
You get to
excited by that.
play.
Yeah, exactly. Experiment is a very positive word. So
Yes.
whenever I give homework, whenever I said, okay, now I need to give you homework, I was like, oh no. So when I'm teaching mindfulness, I don't give homework. I say your home experiments, and I think that
Hmm.
kind of gives it a different angle too. So
Oh,
think
it
of it,
does.
think of life as an experiment. It's much more fun.
I totally agree. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. Now, I read your bio at the beginning, and I think I will maybe generalize and say most people have heard about mindfulness and meditation. What's ACT? Can we talk to that?
Yes. So ACT, the way I teach it is stands for two different things: acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training. And it was originally developed by Dr. Stephen Hayes in the 70s, a long time ago. And he developed it from actually, he had a spiritual experience, and his first research paper was about spirituality. So he was suffering from such severe anxiety. It just got worse and worse, and he was having worse and worse panic attacks. And he was using the best techniques at the time because he was a psychologist. So he was using a form of CBT where you challenge your thoughts, where you do relaxation exercises. So he was trying to use relaxation to prevent his panic attacks, which you think would be a good idea. But actually, he was even getting relaxation induced panic. And it
Mm.
became so bad that he woke up in the middle of the night thinking he was, sweating, thinking he was having a heart attack. And he imagined calling 911. He was in the US. And he imagined the ambulance coming and then telling him that this is just panic as well. So he was at the depth of this lowness. But in the middle of the night experience, he had the experience that a version of that experience that I shared with meditation. He became the observer of his thoughts, the observer of his feelings. And in that moment, he realized something shifted because he knew from that day onwards, no matter what his thoughts say, no matter what emotions come up, that's not him. There's a
Mm.
part of him that's not that. Now, because he was an incredible scientist, he decided, I'm not going to just say, oh, this is a spiritual experience and that's it. And, I'm going to become a guru and teach this, because of around that time, around the 60s and 70s, there were so many different gurus around. There was so much Some of these gurus weren't doing the right thing and they got into lots of trouble and then people didn't like them. He wanted to take a much more scientific approach. So he did lots of very basic level science for years and years and years, and no one really heard about it. But he kind of created the groundwork for what became this therapy and training called ACT. And what he discovered was that there are six principles, and he tested them very carefully, and lots of other scientists did. And these six principles are the foundations of ACT. And according to him, and he's one of the most cited psychologists of all time, he's in the top 100. These six are more well proven than anything else in psychology in a way. It's what cultivates what they call in ACT psychological flexibility. And so I've created an acronym, the word action, because I couldn't remember them at the beginning. And if you go through the letters of the word action, you can actually learn these six principles. And what you'll realize when I share them is that whatever therapies or coaching modalities and probably through your work as well, you're probably applying these in different ways. So the first one is about acceptance or making space. A stands for acceptance, and that's a huge one. There's so much research showing that if we can learn to cultivate a sense of allowing or acceptance, that's powerful. C, this is an interesting one. So C stands for cognitive diffusion, but another word for it is unhooking. So it's the skill of being able to unhook from your thoughts. So if you've got certain thoughts, there's actually really fun techniques in ACT to help you to unhook from them. So it doesn't have to be meditation. It can be these weird things like repeating a thought quickly for 30 seconds or writing a thought on a piece of paper. And there's other techniques like that. So that's cognitive diffusion. T is interesting one. T, I call the transcendent self. So this is the skill of becoming the observer of your experience. Now, this is number three out of the six. This is been proven by science. So something that has been in the spiritual traditions for thousands of years is now at the heart of mental health and coaching, which is that when you cultivate this skill of being the observer of yourself, or have a more flexible sense of who you are, your sense of self, is very important for your mental health and well-being. So that's T. I is that skill of being able to be in the moment, to be able to notice new things, try new things, do things in a different way. O is about it's about becoming open to your values. So opening up to what really matters to you. So what are your values? What are your strengths? You mentioned things like it could be courage, it could be creativity, it could be about community, it could be about connection with yourself. So there's so many different values. So it's opening up to what matters to you. And the final one, which sometimes gets forgotten in things like mindfulness classes, is actually learning to set little goals and take action. So, and it's got, the whole acronym I'm using is the word action. So you need to be able, N stands for navigating with meaningful action. So learning to actually set those goals and take action. So acceptance, cognitive diffusion, transcendent self, in the moment, opening up to your heart's values, and N is for navigating with action. So that's what ACT is, and it's the evidence for it is so good that the World Health Organization, that's their kind of the main way that they've created a way to help people to manage stress around the world, and they've translated it into hundreds of different languages, and they've got this document on their website, and it's all ACT based, but they kind of translate it in a way with pictures and stuff, so it's easy to understand. They've kind of trained people to take it into refugee camps, for example. It's used by Olympic medalists, so there's people that use it in that realm as well. So it's not just a therapy; it's used in businesses as well. It's used everywhere. And if you look at some of the latest books on psychology, sometimes they would be using these principles, but they wouldn't actually call it ACT. So it's a very flexible. And the reason I really like it is that it's because of its flexibility. You can integrate it with whatever. So like, for example, your work, you can integrate ACT into it. And when you integrate ACT into it, it becomes an evidence-based approach because it's got
Yeah.
so much science behind it, and you don't have to teach a fixed course to say this is ACT. You know what I'm sharing right now, the listeners are doing a form of ACT right now because they're starting to reflect on these key principles. So the way they've researched it is so clever, that it doesn't need to have a 6-week program or an 8-week program. It's these 6 principles have been proven to be good for our mental health and well-being. So yeah, that's what ACT is.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, I've made some notes. I definitely want to reflect on how I use those in my work, as you said. I can already sense into that, but I find it's very interesting.
Hmm.
So you talk a lot about peace and purpose in your work. Why those two things?
Peace and purpose is a great summary of ACT and of mindfulness and of spiritual traditions as well. The peace element is that we need to have a certain sense of clarity of mind to be able to navigate. Most we have this negativity bias where we have this a greater chance of thinking about all the things that went wrong than right. Like, let's say in my day today, everything goes as it's supposed to go, but I trip over and I hurt my knee or something. So if I'm reflecting at the end of the day, how did my day go? I wouldn't think, oh yes, I was able to breathe air and there was running water and there was sunshine and I had a great conversation. The attention's much more likely to go to the fact that I injured my knee. And so our peace of mind gets challenged through this negativity bias that some or many of us have. So to be able to reframe that, and there's something I'd like to talk about, is mindful reframing and seeing things in a different way helps to cultivate that sense of clarity of mind so that we can connect with this amazing thing we call life. If we Otherwise our mind is just full of all the stuff that's happened in the past that didn't go right, and it's just that tape that's playing again and again. So peace of mind is really, really important. Um, and that doesn't mean that you don't have thoughts, but it's just you're aware that you have thoughts and you're a bit more flexible in the way you see things. So I think that's what cultivates peace of mind too. It's not about silence of mind necessarily. And the purpose element is that's what creates our energy to do what we do. Like the fact that you're doing this amazing work, the energy for that comes from the purpose behind it. The fact that you're going to be helping other people, you're passionate about what you do, you're helping people to heal through sound, through vibrations, through spirituality. That is an amazing, and that creates the amazing sense of connection, and that gives you that energy and that your drive to kind of get up in the morning. And so, um, this element of the purpose is usually in coaching and stuff. They talk about it. Maybe not so much in therapy, and maybe not so much in classical meditation classes as well. So I think it's something to also keep in mind. But then also you make it practical by, okay, this is my purpose. This is what is meaningful for me. But you also need to think about, okay, how am I actually going to do that? So setting little mini goals, however small you want to make them, to help you kind of take action. And that's what the purpose element is. It's not just sitting in the corner. It's about taking action on what matters to you.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's the purpose
So
element.
there's an alignment in that. So there that sensation of the greater why, or like you said, that motivating value, and then taking action on it is allowing that to bring the energy and then use the energy. And I really like how it kind of ties in with some of the examples you gave earlier about your day. So something you might have a greater purpose, like this is how I want my business to unfold, or this is the type of purpose that I want in this area or that area. But it can also just be, as you say, get up in the morning and how do I want to show up today? What is my purpose for the day? And that's the experimenting and the being present in the moment and sensing into what wants to emerge and unfold, which is not always easy in the society that we live in, where you have very much structure, get up, go to work for most people, get up, go to work, do the 9 to 5 or whatever it might be, however you show up in the workspace, and then come home. And then it kind of has this start all over, start all over. Do you think that practices done in the morning are any more or less beneficial than any other part of the day?
I did some training with a guy called Professor BJ Fogg, and he developed a technique called tiny habits, which is about cultivating habits mostly for well-being. And he said that the morning is easier to cultivate habits than in the evening because of we have a lot more routines in the morning. There's a lot of things like, you wake up, you brush your teeth, you have your shower, and so there's lots of opportunities to kind of get put habits into that morning slots.
Mhm.
I also believe that to be correct. And also, the way you begin something sets the tone for it. So the
Mhm.
way we begin this podcast will set the tone for the way the podcast, the way you start your meditation, the way you build a foundation for a home will set the tone for whether the house is going to stand up or it's going to collapse.
Mhm.
So the way you begin things does seem to have a big effect on the way things go because it's going to have that kind of influence on it. So I
Mhm.
think the things that we do in the morning is going to have an impact on the day.
Yeah.
I have in the past been a big fan of habits and making sure you do the right habits and good habits. But I'm starting to like having reflected more about this idea of mindfulness as in trying new things and doing new things. If we are on if our life is just full of habits, that's actually the opposite of mindfulness because of then you're doing everything on autopilot. And even so-called good habits, if you're doing them on autopilot, I don't think they're really that beneficial.
Mhm.
If you think of like we mentioned AI, it's automatic. There's a sense of it being a machine. It just does what's inevitable. There's no flexibility there. So if we want to be human rather than like a machine, we need to have flexibility. And so we can use routines and habits to help support us, but you need to be careful that they don't become our rulers. So,
Yes.
you may have a routine. Okay, I want to start the day with meditation, but there may be some days where you can't do the meditation or you don't feel like it or something doesn't feel right about it. And it's absolutely okay to change it or maybe take a break from it or try something different. Or maybe your meditation will be in the evening, or maybe your meditation is just trying new things, or maybe it's just one slow breath. So, it's important to have these kind of morning routines, but make sure they don't become like your dictator. So you have this flexibility with it too. And I don't think that many people talk enough about that. There's a almost an obsession with habits, habits, habits all the time. And then why are people reading about it so much? Because or trying so hard to cultivate them. Maybe there's some challenge there too. So there's something about them that may not feel right for some people. I know for me, too many habits doesn't feel good. So it's about creating that flexibility as well. That's important. And like
Mhm.
I mentioned, ACT. It's the heart of ACT is psychological flexibility. It's flexibility that leads to a healthy life. So that's important.
Yeah, I agree that a lot of people don't talk about that piece enough. I think that's great that you shed a light on it for people listening. I remember working with a client of mine who said, I'm really struggling. She was putting a lot of pressure on herself to get her morning routine together. And I said, well, talk me through your routine. And she talked me through like a 3 hour get up, do everything for 3 hours before starting the day.
Yeah.
And if she didn't do that every morning, it felt really hard for her. And I said, oh, how about tomorrow we try one of those things for half an hour and let's just see what happens. Let's just, again, experiment and play. But I do think we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves. You have to meditate for this amount of time, this way. I know we've had conversations, Shamash, and I told you that when I'm vacuuming or cleaning my house, that's meditative for me, right? It's like, do a chore between or get things done. And while I am very ordered, and I mean, this is my personality, is to have discipline and order in many things, I have to say that the moment I stopped putting that pressure on myself and was able to be more flexible, how much more ordered and disciplined I was in the work that I was doing. But with a flexibility piece was so important. It
Yeah.
really was a piece that I had to learn or still
Yeah.
learn, because that
Yeah.
flexibility came through the curiosity. What if I did it this way today?
Nice, nice. And I'm
Yeah.
glad that you mentioned about your personality because we all have a different personality. And for some people, the personality may be more to have lots of routines, and some other people will be less. So we need to listen to ourselves.
Mm.
And another amazing and beautiful insight I had through this lady called Professor Ellen Langer, and I'll talk more about her in a moment, is that everything that we think has a positive quality has a negative to it, and everything that has a negative has a positive. It's just the way you see it. So, for example, someone who is very, very flexible and doesn't like too many routines, another person could say that, oh, they're very undisciplined. But
Mm.
you can't be both disciplined and flexible. So either you're a disciplined person and then you don't have that flexibility, or you have a very flexible personality and then you're not going to be that disciplined. You could put creativity in there. You could, be if you're a very creative person in the way you like to do things, then you may not have so much of a fixed routine, or vice versa. And if you start thinking about all the different kind of negative traits that you or I have, there will be a positive element to it that we value. And it's because we value the flip side that we can't change our side. So that's actually given me kind of a lot of peace of mind too, because of, there'll be certain routines that I may have tried for ages to get into it, and I just haven't really got into it. And it's because of my natural value is for flexibility. And so
Mhm.
it stops us trying beating ourselves up about the fact that we're not behaving the way that we would like to be behaving. So I found
A
that
bit of
that to be
nature and
interesting.
nurture, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. I had to come to terms with that in interactions like I'm with my ex-partner, for example. There are certain things in our interactions or conversations where I would like this to be different, he would like that to be different. And some things were just natural for us to shift because we that was part of, like you said, that the okay, I want you to be more tidy. Oh, that's easy for me. I'm tidied and ordered generally, not saying that's what it was, but as an example. But then to do this or be more spontaneous or things like this, when you like to have things done in a certain way, that's not
Exactly.
necessarily your nature. However, can you find moments to be more spontaneous or take opportunities to create or cultivate something different? Again, it comes back to that beautiful a definition of mindfulness that you brought to the table right at the beginning. So even though things can feel like this is not quite how I like to do things, or someone might go as far as saying, oh, that's just not me. Well, what if you tried to do something different? What would that feel like or be like, or how could that be expressed? And it's just information at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a really good way of putting it. Uh, but when we like, let's say if we love to be spontaneous, and we want to be, let's say, more disciplined, we would be able to do that, but we would have to make this sacrifice of having to be one of being less spontaneous if you want to be more
Yeah.
organized, let's say. So you need to know that, okay, that sacrifice is being made, and you may be able to make that shift, or you may not be able to. And if you are not able to make it, then you don't need to beat yourself up about it, because it's just there's a part of you that loves to be kind of spontaneous and flexible. And if
Yes.
you're a very, very organized person and someone's telling you you need to be more spontaneous, and you try it, but you're struggling with it, again, you can be kind to yourself and just remind yourself that, okay, it's just in your nature. You really value this sense of being organized, and you like to respect other people through your organization, and so that spontaneity is going to be a much smaller element of your personality, and that's okay. And that
Yes.
links to the acceptance as well, so then you can accept yourself however you are, and
Exactly.
that's think of that as a strength.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
beautiful. I love
yeah.
that. And I think that the less pressure we can put on ourselves in general, the better. We really are good at pressurizing ourselves, and I don't
Mm,
think that's healthy in the long term.
absolutely.
Now, I do want to bring non-duality in because it's a subject that I am really excited about and not very well researched, but in my own view, I'd love to explore that with you because it's a part that you bring through your work as well. So can we talk about non-duality and perhaps how you bring it into the work that you do?
Yeah, so non-duality is that philosophy school that I mentioned earlier. It was kind of quite steeped in that way of thinking. So it was influenced by what is called Advaita. So the word non-duality comes originally from the Sanskrit word Advaita, and Advaita means not two. And so it kind of comes from that tradition. And that transcendent self piece that I mentioned in ACT, part of why I loved ACT is that it's kind of so deeply steeped in science, but also has this part of being like your transcendent self or your observer self. So I don't really explicitly say that, okay, now I'm teaching you non-duality.
Mhm.
But when I'm guiding meditations, I've got this club, the Daily Mindfulness Club, and I teach a meditation every morning. And some of those meditations would be things like breathing exercises. And then every Wednesday, for example, we study the Tao Te Ching, the ancient kind of Chinese text. And that may lead to some philosophical conversations afterwards about non-duality. And sometimes it's just through, through our meditation practice, we kind of start to connect with that part of ourselves which becomes the observer or the witness of everything. And there's this sense of how we separate everything as me and other, me and the world. That's one way of thinking. But when the thinking starts to quieten down, we become the observer of our experiences and start dropping into this consciousness or awareness. There isn't that much sense of a separation, and there is more of this feeling of peace and calm and contentment that comes from that. So it's, I guess it's a bit of a, you can kind of share ideas about it, and you can reflect about it, and you can talk about it, but it's a bit of a personal journey, I think, for each person to um, come to connect with that part of themselves, and have that non-dual experience of thoughts dropping away, feelings kind of calming down a little bit, and connecting with this sense of oneness, and that the fact that ultimately there is not two, there's not one.
Yeah.
I when I got into this philosophy, I kind of uh, as I said, I was 20 in my early 20s. I was still kind of cultivating, learning my own philosophy, and I got into it almost a bit too much, and I actually almost ended up almost failing my degree because I discovered a teacher called Krishnamurti. I don't know if anyone's heard
Yeah.
of that, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and this is
Mhm.
before the internet, so it was books. I was reading book after book after book, and I was just trying to work it out, and he was teaching a form of new non-duality in a way, but it was. I started to just spend so much time in trying to getting into it and trying to get awakened or enlightened or become one with the universe, whatever that means. That I kind of disconnected from my normal everyday stuff that I needed to do, and as I said, I almost failed my degree, but luckily I managed to just get through. So, and then after that, I realized that non-duality or living in a non-dual way is one way of seeing the world, and it's helpful, and it may be helpful from time to time, but to you can kind of take it too far, which is what I was doing, which was trying to live in a non-dual way or trying to get enlightened, and that wasn't very helpful too. So it's certainly about balance and remembering that everything is different from different perspectives. So it's about what it gives is the power of perspective. There's different ways of seeing things, and one perspective is a non-dual perspective. Another one is through the mindfulness. So using it almost like a tool, I found is helpful rather than an absolute philosophy as that is the right one. Maybe
Yeah.
I was a bit too obsessed with it, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about that in my own personal exploration is if as you said, it's not, we are living in a world that we can see how duality exists around us in many different ways. Me, you, this, that, all of these things. And when I think about it, and I remember when I was young, my mom once said to me, whatever choice you make and action you take is impacting you, not just whoever you're interacting with. And those are things that she would drop and I would go away and think about. And I just feel so moved by, if you could see the world as interconnected and as one. The example that people often give is, if you take a drop of water out of the ocean, does it become something else, or is it still part of the ocean? Is it still, even in the glass, even in the drop or whatever, does it still have the same essence of the ocean? And of course it does. it's still water, it's still that molecule, it's still, H2O
Absolutely.
and all the different things. So for me, I think when I think about it from a personal stance and how I love to see it in the work that I do, is then you would treat people very differently if you understood that we're all connected. That if I'm hurting that person, actually, I'm hurting everyone and I'm hurting me too, because we're all interconnected. Equally, though, if I'm healing me, which I believe that inside out approach and starting at home is so important, then I'm also healing other people and everyone and all that there is. And therefore, our only responsibility really is those small steps with us, starting at home with us, and how that can create a ripple effect. And that's for me the piece of non-duality that I like to explore and share and talk about as an idea of how we can change the world if we thought differently about that.
I love that. I really like that's a great example. And this idea of, I remember I had one insight was that, trying to first of all, I had this idea of, trying to change the world, make the world a better place, and not thinking of about that self-transformation piece. But then I
Mm.
had this insight that, hang on a minute, I am part of the world. Like, even if I change no one else but myself, the world
Yes.
has changed because if I'm part of the world, like everybody else is part of the world. But not only that, there's some research on a thing called mindful contagion, which is that when we become more mindful, when we start to notice new things, try new things, it automatically has an effect on other people. And that has an effect on other people. So there's this amazing ripple effect that happens that starts from ourselves. And so yeah, that self-transformation ends up changing the world, just like you said. And absolutely, like we're connected to I find it amazing. We're connected to every other single person on the whole planet within 6 connections, they say. That's amazing.
Mm.
We're
That
so
is.
we're so much more connected than we realize. And so all these things like this conversation and the rest of it has a much more powerful effect than we'll ever get to realize, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love this.
Mm. Yeah.
And now, from the sounds of it and what I know of you, you have a lot of tools under your belt. You spoke about ACT and non-duality, breath work, mindfulness, meditation. You've done this training, that training, and so on. And of course, when we bring that all together, the purpose-driven piece, it's to do your part and to help and heal and bring peace and purpose into people's lives. What's next for you? What's kind of your curiosity leading you now? Is there another book on the way? I want to talk about that. What's next for you in that way?
In terms of another book, yes, I've written quite a few of these books in part of the For Dummies series. So the one I'm working on right now is breathing exercises.
Oh,
I
nice.
read a book by James Nestor called Breath, and I was just shocked at how every single page in that book gave me information that I didn't know about breathing. So I learned so much through that. I did a workshop, attended a workshop with him and some of the authors that he talks about in his book and breathwork teachers. I've done trainings with them. And so I thought, okay, I want to put together something that simple for people to be able to understand and put into practice. So I'm working on that and I'm passionate about that. But I mentioned earlier on this lady called Ellen Langer. And
Yes.
I've become passionate about her work, and I don't think it's known well enough. So, mindfulness has been translated as meditation a lot at the moment. But 45 years ago in Harvard, she decided to go down the path of researching mindfulness without meditation. And she discovered so many different benefits of mindfulness that doesn't even require any meditation practice. And she's, called the mother of mindfulness now. And she's one of the early pioneers of positive psychology as well. So I taught a workshop recently based on her kind of teachings and approach. And just to summarize that, because I'm very fascinated about it, it's about, her definition is mindfulness is noticing new things. Because if you say to someone, be present, it sounds good, but how do you do it? And so she's discovered the how to do it is by actively noticing new things. That's the bottom up approach. But there's also a beautiful top down approach to this, which is a bit more difficult, which is if you notice that everything is changing all the time and that everything is different from different perspectives, if you realize that deeply, then you automatically become mindful because if you want to be awake to the fact of wanting to notice new things. So that's fascinating. And then this idea of mindful reframing, I've become fascinated about. So reframing is about learning to consciously see things from a different angle. And so, if there's a part of if whoever's listening to this, if there's a certain challenge that they're going through or difficulty they're going through, to challenge yourself to see things from a different perspective. Like, how would someone who's going through a much more difficult time, how would they see what you're going through? How about a different person in a different country? How would they see that? How about your younger self, your older self? What would someone, a very spiritual person, how would they see this challenge? So to mindfully reframe your challenges, I find that fascinating. So I've become very interested in that too. And I don't know how. Maybe I'll do some more kind of online courses and stuff to share this with people more. Maybe write some more stuff about it. But I'm fascinated by her work, and I want to share it more to get it accessible to more people.
Just curious on that kind of mindful reframing. I'm a fan of reframing as well. I don't usually say mindful reframing, but I completely understand the shift of perspective. Just in the examples you gave, majority of them, if not all, were about others' experiences, right? Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and how it might change your perspective, which I think is interesting. How can someone do the inside out approach? How can they reframe something from within themselves? I think you spoke about inner child or future self. Could we speak about that piece a little bit?
Yes.
That's quite fascinating to me.
Yes, so you could shift perspective from time, place, or perspective. So you could see it from, like I've mentioned, from other person's perspective. You can shift it in time. So what would your younger self see, or your future self, like you said? And then you can also think in terms of physical location, like if you're in a different location, what effect would that have? So the thing is, there's probably an infinite number of different perspectives of seeing something. And, normally we think of it in terms of, okay, is it half, is it a third full or two, is it a third full or two-thirds empty?
Uh,
Okay, so there's just two ways there of seeing it. But actually, there's an infinite number of ways of seeing this because it's also atoms. It's
mhm.
also energy. I'm holding a glass of water for anyone listening to
Yes.
audio. Okay. Um, Also, why do we call it a glass? It's actually made out of sand. It's a piece of artwork as well. There's somebody that's designed it. It's a product of IKEA. I can see so, and we can keep, so one good exercise for people to do is take an object and just try and think of as many different ways of describing the same thing. And that is an example of seeing things from different perspectives. And when you do something like that, you're exercising your mind, you're cultivating mental and cognitive flexibility. And then the next time you face a challenge, you'll be able to see things from different perspective. The very
Yeah.
act of being grateful is a perspective shift. If you're taking things for granted, to be grateful is to see things from the perspective of gratitude.
Mhm.
So yeah, seeing things from different people, like you said, that's one way. Time is another way. Location is another way, and there's probably an infinite number of other ways of seeing things as well. And it's a really good exercise for ourselves to see
Yeah, I
that.
think that's a great, very practical experiment, which I like. I
Yeah.
like to bring these things,
Yeah.
bring them to earth. One that I use a lot, actually, and it's something that I use from Brendan Burchard. He's known as one of the top high performance coaches. So
Okay.
it's all about habits. His book and things like that. Interestingly, as we spoke about habits, but one of the questions in like a daily planner that he has that I really resonate with, which speaks to this, is what would your best self do? Or what would my higher self do? Right. And I find that for me reframes a lot of things really beautifully, because it's not just what would this, if I did like this person or that person or left or right or whatever, but tapping into the best parts of you or the higher consciousness or the highest self brings a very different perspective. And I love that. That piece for me is so beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it can lead on to the follow-up is, okay, well, what is a challenge that might happen today? And then how would my higher self deal with it?
Mm. I like that.
Really,
I
really
like that.
interesting
Yeah.
questions of hit,
Yeah, good
right? So I
question.
use
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah. And these questions are powerful, right? Like
Yeah.
reflecting on these different questions. Like I remember a quote from someone, the quality of life is shaped by the quality of the questions you ask yourself. I think
Absolutely.
that's a great one. So to help, and I'm doing quite a lot of journaling at the moment, and just trying to think of new questions to ask myself makes the journaling experience really interesting. So I'm enjoying that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love that quote. And from an NLP perspective, it's really understanding that the unconscious mind is not logical. It's not, doesn't reason. It just has all the information there. And if you ask it something, it's just going to provide the files. Here you go. So the difference between, oh, why do I look so fat in these jeans today? Your unconscious mind is going to come up with all the reasons why you look fat in the jeans. But if you say, oh, how could I feel healthier and slimmer in this outfit today? It's going to come up with all the ways you could do that. Which would you want to hear? Which would you prefer to hear as a reflection?
Exactly.
So that
Exactly.
question has to be something that's really, for me, framed and can be reframed into a positive, helpful question that guides you towards the result you're actually desiring. So I really love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah. We're constantly asking ourselves questions, and we see that from a young child asking questions of a parent, and it kind of continues in our mind, and we can end up asking these really harsh questions of ourselves which don't really have an answer, or just go down that negative route. So to be mindful is to be awake to that and to notice that, and not don't get into too much of a negative. So if you do notice, like, okay, that's interesting, that's that part of me that likes to kind of criticize and self-judge, thank you mind.
Yes.
That's a technique from ACT, actually. And say, okay, I learned on that podcast there's actually an infinite number of different ways of seeing this. So let me see if
Mhm.
I can see this in two or three different ways.
Yeah,
And that can be quite a fun exercise to do.
that is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, I could keep talking to you forever. I think there's so much to
It's
pull
been fun.
from.
Yeah.
And I'm just so grateful, Shamash, that you joined us today. It's always a pleasure and fun to chat with you and have good laughs. I'm sure this will not
Yes.
be the last time. We'll have many more. And
Yes,
I was
absolutely.
really happy to jump on your podcast with Calvin. So I'm looking forward to that experience
Yeah.
being shared as well at some point. So that was fun. But I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing and the way you are showing up in the world to help people, really connect. And I know we all need this, especially the way the world is right now and has been for us, I guess, as long as we can remember, really needing to connect with that peace and that purpose and find really practical ways to navigate the world and ourselves in it. And so I'm so grateful for you and the work you're doing. So thank you so much. And for what
Thank you,
you've shared
Simone.
today.
You're a very skillful interviewer, and it's been a
Oh,
pleasure being here.
thank
So
you
thank you
so
so
much.
much. Thank you.
So I always ask one final question to all of my guests, and that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? And that is just a self-prayer or desire that you wish upon the world.
I actually wrote something down actually
Oh,
because I
beautiful.
love that question. So let me read my answer here because it's a good question.
Thank you.
So uh, my answer is: May the world embrace the art of playful, creative mindfulness, where curiosity replaces judgment, small steps lead to transformation, and every breath reminds us of the joy of being alive.
Ooh, just let that land.
Let me just do a
Shamash,
mic drop.
thank
Let me just
you.
do mic
Mic
drop.
drop.
Actually, I don't want to drop my mic. I'll break
No, you
it.
don't. Thank you so much for your presence today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simone.
If you love this episode, hit that like and subscribe button and make sure to check out our other episodes. Thanks so much for being with us today, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.